Hello and welcome to Plant Pod. I'm Robert Romej, and today is actually part 2 in an interview that we had with Nic Burleson. So if you didn't listen to last week's episode, I encourage you to go back and listen to that first because it's going to give you a lot of context in the conversation that we have today. With that said, let's go ahead and dive into the second part of the conversation with Nic Burleson. This is going to be part 2. Right after we finished our conversation, we ended up having some more good conversation. So why not hit the record button again and get a little bit more of this recorded? Because I think people really want to hear more about hospitality and maybe a little bit more about some of the things that you've been doing, even around the world, Nic. I'd like to start it off. I have a question for you regarding hospitality. You talked a lot about hospitality as on Sunday, but does hospitality start on Sunday? Does it start, where would you say? Where does hospitality start?
So I think that's a great question. The hospitality model that we teach is heart, home, house. So hospitality has to start in the heart of the leaders of the church, the pastor, the leaders. If we don't have hospitable hearts, then our homes will not be hospitable. If our homes are not hospitable, we can never expect the house of God to be hospitable. You can't turn on a care for the outsider for 2 hours a week. You either care for the outsider or you don't. And so when we coach churches, we really challenge leaders to, if you're going to take this journey of hospitality, it starts with making sure your heart is geared toward your life being welcoming and wanting to people who are far from God. So for us, like my family, we have a lot of people in our home on a normal, regular basis who do not follow Jesus. Whether that's college athletes, the neighbors down the street, people of other faiths. It starts with our lives intersecting with people, our homes then being open to people, and then that will naturally overflow into the house of God. So it's not something you can flip a switch on with the idea that we can just turn this off on Sunday and I don't have to deal with those people any other time. It's a way that we live. So you can flip the switch because the switch is saying, Jesus, I want to treat people like you treat people.
Wow, yeah.
And then doing that all of the time leads to a hospitable church.
Would you have any sort of tips for someone? Because if you've never really done that before, you've never maybe opened up your home, welcome people like that on a regular basis, it's a little bit maybe scary or maybe a little bit daunting, right? You know, like maybe not for someone who's been doing it for a long time, such as yourself or other people, but like what are just some easy tips to start to do that, to open up your home to people?
I think it sometimes still is daunting, even though we've done it, even though it's a practice of our life. Anytime we invite somebody new over, there is this like, we want them to feel welcome. We want them to feel at home. We don't want anything from them necessarily, right? So there is this like, I hope these people like us kind of thing, because you want people to feel at home. But I think that the tip is just start where you're naturally, anyone can be hospitable because we're all around people every day. And so just start with the people you're naturally around and start just by engaging with those people. Start listening to people. Find out what they're into. You may find out that your neighbor, in our case, our neighbor was a professional trick horse rider. So he's the guy that like stands on top of the horses and does the ropes and all that in the rodeo. So naturally, like when there's a rodeo in town, because we live in Texas, that's a great place to invite our neighbors to go hang out. And so, just start listening to people at work, inviting people. A meal, there's something about a meal that just takes all the defenses down. Inviting people into your home to eat is a huge thing. And that's really our go-to of, hey, we want to get to know people. We want people to feel welcome. Let's invite them over for a meal.
That's cool. That's really cool.
I grew up in a time where we would go to evangelism crusades. Billy Graham was still alive, and we would, get all the churches. And by the way, I think he's an incredible leader, and I went to him. And, Louis Palau and others. And even our Sunday morning, sometimes it's like an evangelistic time, when we preach on that. But then there's the hospitality, and some are saying that's the new evangelism window of why we do it. And we love people just to love people. You and I were taught by Bob Roberts about that. You just love people.
Yeah.
Not to get something, but just to love them.
For sure.
That's powerful. But what's the difference between a crusade and your home? And why is the home, in some ways, maybe a better venue?
Wow, that's
For what we're living in right now.
I don't know if I've ever thought about it.
I
that
haven't
way.
either, but it's a
That's
podcast,
a good question.
and that's
That's
why,
a
as you're
great
talking,
question.
I'm thinking about it. Yeah.
I think with a crusade or a church service, like when someone comes to a church service, there are natural expectations. Or a crusade, there are natural expectations. Even if you live in a place outside of the Bible Belt, which the Bible Belt is dead.
Sure.
The Bible Belt doesn't exist anymore. But even if you live in a place that is highly unchurched and very low percentage of people who are religious, there's still an expectation. I'm going to this evangelistic thing.
Yeah.
They're going to tell me that I need to follow God with my life. I think inviting people into our home lowers that barrier. And there's not an expectation other than I want to get to know you and you want to get to know me. And there isn't. I want people in my life to know the hope of Jesus, because that hope of Jesus has made an incredible impact in my life.
That's good.
Whether that's at a crusade, a church service, or in my home.
Yeah.
Sometimes, because I'm a pastor, people can say, if I'm at a crusade or a church service, well, you just want that because that's good for what you do. But if we're eating hot dogs at my house,
Yeah.
I just care about my neighbors.
Yeah.
And so I think that open door to relationship and that open door to experience the hope of Jesus is so much more well received. Something about Jesus constantly breaking bread with people.
Yeah.
Something about gathering people around the table that just puts us all on equal footing. And I'm not the expert. I'm just sharing with you what's made a difference in my life.
Yeah.
And I think people are more receptive to learn from that because it's more authentic and vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's good.
I mean, I love that. I love the breaking bread, and I still to this day don't know why. There's a mystery there, but there is. It's
Yeah,
a
it
mystery
is.
of breaking bread. Even when Jesus kind of had a crusade, right?
For sure.
And there was a large group.
He
What
was
did he
feeding
do?
people.
He's like, we're going to need some food.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And so there's something about it, even if you're at a big crusade or a big event, there's something about that food dynamic, and it lowers, I guess it just lowers your guard a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
And you're dialoguing about it. Luke tells us to eat what's placed before us, even when we're visiting somebody. As you've walked through this in your church, do you have people that you look specifically for to lead out in these areas? And what do you look for when you say, I'm going to put somebody in charge of kind of being in charge of greeting on Sunday morning?
Yeah.
What are some characteristics that you see?
I think number one, they have to have an outward focused heart. That doesn't necessarily mean they could be the most outgoing, extroverted person in your church, but they could be more introverted, but they care deeply about the people who are not there yet. Their heart is focused on people who aren't there. What I would say is I coach churches on this. And so I will say, who is the person in your church who is the noticer?
That's good.
They notice the new person.
Yeah.
They notice the new family. They notice that person's sitting by themselves.
That's good. And you may not even notice them, right? But they
may
do,
not.
yeah.
And it
Yeah,
doesn't always
that's
have
good.
to be the pastor or a staff member who we have this young guy in our church. His name's Austin. And I've just picked up that he notices people. And so I said, hey, will you help us with hospitality because you notice people? Yeah. And I think that's what you're looking for is someone who notices others. And that could be an introvert, that could be an extrovert, all kinds of skill sets, but someone who notices other people. You want that person to duplicate themselves and to multiply themselves so that other people start noticing people too.
It's a really great distinction. Yeah, I don't think that would be the norm for most churches to think of. I think we would think of who's the extrovert who loves people, is going to, greet with a big hug and a hello. But it's a really good distinction because that doesn't necessarily make that person feel seen. Not everybody wants that kind of attention, right? That
For
an
sure.
extrovert might give them, but just asking them, hey, how was your day? Or, how was, remembering things that they brought up from the previous week, showing
So
that
true.
intentionality
So
with them.
true.
I think that's such a great distinction of showing, of really welcoming those people in and making them feel just loved and seen. That's really great.
Yeah, you know, a lot of times the extroverted person, two things. Not that it can't be an extroverted person. A lot of times
Right.
it's the extroverted person is the noticer.
Sure.
But a lot of times the extroverted person can be a little over the top.
That's
You've
me.
all
Guilty
been
as charged.
you've all been to that church where you're like, they were a little too welcoming. What's wrong here? Or they are already so well known that it's hard for them to notice people who are new or who might be coming for the first time, or who might be looking like they're not sure if they belong because they're already surrounded with people who've connected with them because they're an
Right.
extrovert. So
Right.
yeah, it's
That's
good.
so good.
That is really good. I never really thought about the noticer part. The way you talk about it almost makes it feel like it's a gift in and of itself in a way, which isn't something that gets talked about a lot. But just thinking about the people who do that, and there's people who don't, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But just picking out the people that are a part of our body that do have that natural inclination to notice someone. I haven't heard it said that way, but it's cool to like encourage sort of someone in that way.
Yeah, along those lines, here's the first like inclination I had that this Austin guy was a noticer. I was leading a training, and I just said something. He was helping serve lunch at the training, and he had this really cool hat on, and I just said, man, that hat is awesome. He's a college kid. He's out of college now, but at this point he's a college kid. And I was like, man, dude, I love that hat. Where did you get it? And he was like, oh, it's like a Western store 10 miles from here. And I was like, oh, it's so cool. Well, I went back to leading the training. He left because he was done serving lunch. He wasn't doing anything else at the training. Well, he comes back when we're on break that afternoon, and he was like, hey, I got something for you. They didn't have this hat, but I got you this hat. And so I pulled this hat out of the bag, and he had bought me a hat very similar. But then he said this. He's like, he's like, the patch is red and black and white, and I'm a sneakers guy. I'm a sneakerhead. And he's like, I noticed that most of your sneakers are red and black or black and white. So I think this will match with all your sneakers. I had not been around him that much at that point, but he had picked up, number one, that I was a sneakers guy, and number two, the like he put thought into the color. That's what I talk about when noticing, and that's what he said. I noticed, right? Wow. There are people in our churches who notice. They see people, and we know who they are because we feel seen by them. Yeah. They're the people we like gravitate to because we know that they see us, that we're safe with them. That's the person you want leading hospitality.
Yeah.
Because they're going to see other people too.
That's
so
good.
For using him as an example, have you asked him to lead in some form of hospitality?
Yeah, so just recently I asked him, I basically said, hey, I want you to step into being a part. We just had a big training where we're training all the new hospitality leaders at our church. And so I personally, we call it shoulder tapping. We learned it from a pastor named Michael Fletcher. I shoulder tapped him on it and said, hey, we're opening this up to everybody, but everybody means you. I want you in the room to help us lead in this area in our church.
Very cool.
And so he'll kind of be eyes and ears for us on our Sunday morning gatherings. So.
Okay, explain shoulder tapping a little bit.
So shoulder tapping, most of the time.
I know what it is, but it sounds to me like he used it as a description of leadership.
Yeah, so most of the time when we recruit people to be on our volunteer teams at our church, we think the best way to do it is get up on a Sunday and say, hey, we need kids workers or we need greeters. So if you're interested in that, sign up. Or we do an email or a text blast or post it on social media. We need volunteers. Well, I think most people think they don't have anything to give to the kingdom. And everyone has significant gifts and skills to give to the kingdom. Absolutely. So when we say, hey, we need a kids worker, most people go, oh, I couldn't do that. They're not talking to me. Mm-hmm. When we say we need some greeters, most people go, oh, I couldn't do that. They're not talking to me. But when we shoulder tap is when we recruit in such a way that we notice something about people and we go tap them on the shoulder and go, hey, I know you're here 15 minutes early every week. we're looking for some people just to high five kids at the door and let parents know that we're glad they're here. Would you be willing to, when you get here, would you be willing to be a greeter? I can train you how to do it. I'll show you how to do it. You can shadow me for a couple weeks, but that's shoulder tapping where we're asking them to do specifically a specific task because we've seen something in them. But it requires us as leaders to walk slowly and to see people. And that's sometimes why it's just easier to go, who'll help with kids? We need some kids workers, instead of like really observing our people and then going, hey, I've seen this in you. Here's how you can use it for the kingdom. Well, they're far more likely to say yes because it's harder to tell you no face to face, right? That's just human nature. But they also realize then they do have something to invest in the kingdom.
That's good.
So not only are you, you talk about like your leaders doing this, so you're doing this, you're looking for people who
For sure.
show up 15 minutes early, but that's also a lot on you. I mean,
Yeah.
you're doing a lot probably on a Sunday morning, right? So
Yeah.
are there other people who are helping you also?
Yeah,
notice that?
so-
And how did that culture start?
So what we did is we learned it, we started doing it, and then quickly, my wife and I, a couple of our team members started training all the people that were in leadership roles in our church to be able to do that as well. And so we said, hey, we're going to teach you how to do this. Why don't you come spend the next few Sunday mornings? I need you here at this time. Hey, some of it's not on Sunday mornings. Hey, I'm taking this person to coffee. I want you to come to this meeting and listen to how I do this so that you'll know how to do this to recruit people for your area. So I think it's just modeling for people because it really is an easy skill, but it's an intentional skill. So people need to learn how to do it. They just need to see it done.
That's so good.
Do you have specific training you do with them, or is it mainly just shadowing?
We have both. So
Okay.
we do specific training. So the way kind of Timber Ridge was set up is that our normal flow would be 4 times a year we do what we call team night. So that's where we're training every volunteer in our church, and that's like motivation, inspiration, and like a generic, probably something about hospitality because that affects everything. And then in between those team nights, so 4 times a year we're all together. In between those team nights, the individual teams are getting together and they're doing training. Like if it's kids ministry, something specific for kids ministry. If it's the worship team, something specific for worship. If it's greeters, something specific for greeters. And we're training them specifically too. But in all of that is shadowing. So if people come to team night, we use team night as an on-ramp. So, hey, if you serve or if you're interested in serving, come have dinner with us, hear about where we're headed in this next season of our church. They come, we say, if you're not serving, here's how you sign up, and we're going to get you with somebody tonight that you can shadow next Sunday or Wednesday or whatever team they're joining. And then in the individual ministry teams too, we're constantly saying shadow, shadow, shadow. It's for our people, it's been the easiest way to learn.
Okay, good. That's awesome. Well, I've got a couple of more questions, but I wanted to open it up to you guys. You guys have any? Got a couple of them. I want to take it global. Okay, so we're gonna jump from Stephenville to Vietnam. You and I went there.
Yeah.
I think it was your first
My
trip.
first time there.
Yeah,
Wow.
we went to Vietnam, and you've done an incredible amount of work there in the northern part of Vietnam, and without disclosing things that we shouldn't disclose or anything like that, just talk to me a little bit about the importance of hospitality as it relates to going into a communist country with all what supposed limitations we have.
Yeah.
But how has that opened the doors?
I think, a lot of times when we think about global work, we think about like evangelism, projects, evangelism work. We think about those kind of things. Like, let's go do religious work in another country. But the way we do it is through what's called domain engagement. And you mentioned Pastor Bob Roberts earlier with GlocalNet, and that's where we learned that, how to do domain engagement. And so what we do is we teach people how to use their skills and or jobs. With college students, a lot of them don't have career jobs yet. So their skills and their passions and their jobs to serve in another country. And so that is a position of humility and a position of hospitality, because we're not going in going, we have all the truth and you need to know all the truth. We're just going in going, taking the position of a servant, taking the position that Jesus took to say, we're here, we want to use our skills, our passions, our jobs to serve you. And so we've had teachers and construction workers, farmers, college students. We're doing teacher seminars, English classes, business development. Our church built the first ever basketball court in northern Vietnam. We needed to build a basketball court because we were having a basketball camp. And you can't have that without a court. Our college students installed a soccer field. It's the only lighted soccer field in the province where we work, AstroTurf Field. And we've built kitchens and dorms, and we've engaged in local schools. And all of that, what we're doing is we're taking the position of a servant, humility and hospitality, but we're also learning. We've learned so much from serving in Vietnam because of their culture of community, because they don't have the same societal focus on the individual that we do. It's more a focus on community, which is very much others focused, and honoring your guests is huge in Vietnamese culture. And so we have learned how to honor our guests in our church in America from our friends in Vietnam. How to be others focused, how to think about people outside of yourself. They've taught us so many lessons.
I remember when we went, and about 2 days in, you said, this is great, and I'm learning how we're going to engage, but it's probably not going to be our country.
Yeah.
Because it was Vietnam. Yeah. And you guys are Texans.
Yeah.
You know, that drive big trucks, and you're giants.
Yeah.
Right? And oil, and, you know. How did that happen? What was it that caused you to say, this is where we engage? Because you still are giants, except for a few people in Vietnam. You still are.
We are giants.
You're giants.
Yeah, compared to
Vietnam
folks.
and China. We were, close to the border there. So explain to me how that happened.
So I thought it would just be too far of a reach for our community and our church to partner with a communist country, to partner with a group of people that we look so different. I mean, I'm taking big old redneck Texans to Vietnam, so it's not like we can fit in. We are large.
You're not blending in.
We are large, you know, and so we're not blending in at all. And so I knew it would be a stretch, but on that trip, I just really had a couple different moments with God, the Holy Spirit just speaking to me. We were at a school, and they were showing us the dorm/classrooms. And I still have the picture. It's on my phone, it's on my laptop, and it's in our house. And you'll remember it's of that wooden schoolroom. And they told us that that's where the kids, the girls had a new dorm, but the boys didn't. And it's in the mountains, so it's cold in the winter, and you could see through the mud and wood slats. There were just holes in the wall. And we were not, it wasn't winter yet when we were there, but you could just feel the wind blowing in from the mountain through there. And I remembered we had been, at that point, we had met with so many people, and they're like, so if you want to come help us, come help us. If you want to come serve, come serve. If you want to come work at the hospital, come work at the hospital. And we just had a meeting with the principal. And he had said, we're open to someone partnering with us if you want to come serve. And I didn't hear an audible voice from God, but in my heart, the Spirit spoke to me and said, how many times do hurting people have to ask for help before you would come and share hope? And in that moment, I knew we were going to Vietnam. And, we've been over there a lot, and we've taken so many people over there and so many trips over there and helped other organizations and other churches engage there. Probably 6 or 7 years later, I was standing on that same school, and I was on the balcony overlooking some of the work we had done, and I just felt like the Lord spoke to me again, and he said, I built Timber Ridge in these mountains. Wow. And it really is true. Like, we were built in the mountains of Vietnam. We learned hospitality there. Wow. We learned about community there. We've done some stuff. Wow. We've built some kitchens and soccer fields and basketball goals and done some teacher educations and camps. But we have received way more than we've given from the Vietnamese people and from our friends there because of what they've taught us and how they treat each other and how they live out community and hospitality. So we've gained far more than we've given.
You know, it's a lot of times when talking about a mission trip, right, or something going somewhere, a church going somewhere, a lot of times I will hear in those discussions about some of the things that they maybe do and stuff, but I keep hearing you talking about what you learned. It's very different, what you guys learned. And so what would you say to a group of people that maybe they haven't gone to, like we're actually getting ready to go the second time to Belize. A couple of the people, it'll be their first time. So what would you tell those two people, like, hey, this is your first time going into a country, like how do you have that learning cap on instead of what we maybe might be more inclined to put on a different cap?
That's a great question. I think the key thing is posture. If you go into a trip like that or an engagement opportunity like that and you take the posture of a learner, it makes all the difference. You can serve people and learn at the same time. If you take the posture of an expert, I think that's where specifically the church in the West has imported a bunch of stuff to other countries that's not biblical and of Jesus, because we've said, hey, we're the experts. We're here to be rescuers. We're here to show you what you don't know and what you have wrong. It's a different way of going about it. If you take on the posture of a learner, hey, I'm just one person who's experienced the hope of Jesus. I can learn from everybody, and I just want to share hope with the world as I learn. Is a completely different posture. I think posture is everything. And what helps me, I learned this from a couple different people, what helps me is to keep like a journal or a notebook when I go, to just write down some things that I'm learning because it keeps me rooted that whole time in the posture of a learner. I'll be honest, the first time I went to Vietnam, we landed, I'd never been on a flight over 2 hours. And so we landed after being on the plane for 14 hours in Korea. We had to get on another 5-hour flight. And I was like, man, I'm just getting up. I'm going home. I'm not doing this. What am I doing going to a communist country? They're going to arrest me. They don't want me there. All these kind of things that go through your mind. And everything that I thought about in that airport was completely wrong. And so it takes that posture of a learner to go, what door is God opening up for me to just be Jesus where I wake up that day? And for the next however many days, it'll be in Belize. It'll be in Vietnam, wherever it is that I wake up in those days.
What that makes me think, like, is I just want to ask good questions, or I just want to like go with the mindset of like, what can I ask instead of what can I like, tell, you know, kind of a different thing. But I think that convicts me. You know?
I think another thing too is like wherever you're going, become a student of that place before you get there.
Oh, that's cool.
I know a lot about Vietnam. When we moved to Stephenville, I would tell people like, hey, you know, nobody in Stephenville should know more about Stephenville and Erath County than me. Like not even the mayor, not the city council. Like I want to be an expert at where God is calling me to share hope. And so again, that just cultivates the posture of learning. Like, hey, here's where we're going. What can I learn about their culture, about how they relate to one another, about what they feel is important, about their society before I get there, so that I can be a better student when I get there.
That's good. And I feel like that would also just naturally breed compassion and empathy
It
for
does,
those people, right?
without
Because
a
now
doubt.
that you know what their life looks like, more or less, you know, from a maybe 30,000 foot scale. And it reminded me something you had mentioned earlier that I want to touch on about something that's maybe a uniquely American plight of that individualism that we all kind of are born into if we were, you know, born into the church. Is it's my faith, it's about me and God, and I don't need anyone else. And even if they are connected to a local church body, typically it's me and my church. So how do you help your people kind of shed that view and expand it to, it's not me and my church, it's the church, it's God's church, which is global, right? And how do you get people to look past just their local, you know, where they're living or, you know, where they work and play, and no, I have brothers and sisters around the world. How do you get them to see that and care about it?
That's a great question. I think you're constantly pushing back, not just against Western church, but American ideology. So it's a constant I don't want to say struggle. It's hard, but I think it's just a constant intentionality that you just have to be constant about pushing back. You can't go, oh, we overcame that individualism.
Sure.
No, we didn't, because it's everywhere around us in society. So I think it's constantly, and I think a good reminder for people is something, Brian, actually you taught me when we were just starting out planting. You and Omar, friend Omar, was there's so many one another's in Scripture that you cannot practice on your own.
Yeah.
If you have individual faith, you can't bear one another's burdens.
Right.
You can't pray for one another. You can't serve one another. You can't love one another. You can't mourn with those who mourn. You can't rejoice with those who rejoice. And so all of these things that the Bible teaches, and so many things that Jesus directly commanded, cannot be accomplished in an individual faith bubble. And so I think we just constantly continue to remind our people about that we're called to live in community, to be a part, that the church is the family of God. Right. And we just constantly teach that theology to where we're intentionally just continually pouring that into our people.
Yeah, that's so good.
That is. You know, as you guys talk, I would think that, because I'm curious how you guys even really know each other. And so I would imagine that others listening too want to know a little bit about how you guys know each other.
You know, we met each other through, I believe it was Kevin Cox with Kevin.
Yeah.
Kevin was part of a church planning cohort that we had at Northwood Church, where Pastor Bob Roberts was senior pastor at the time. And we gathered up church planners for a period of a few days, and we would teach them kingdom truths. And the 4 key components were the kingdom of God, how to be a disciple, how to engage society, and then also really the outgrowth of that is the church. And what is the church? And so we met at one of those cohorts, and it was through Kevin Cox.
Yeah, we met. Kevin and Scott Venable had invited me to that cohort, and that's where we met. And then Brian was super helpful to us in our early years. In fact, even you probably have forgotten this, but we were planting a collegiate church, and we hadn't even launched yet. People told that we moved to a small rural town in Texas that had a college, and we're like, we're going to plant a church that reaches college students and blue-collar folks, and everybody was in a town that hadn't had a new church plant since 1950s.
Oh, wow.
And everybody was like, you're committing career suicide. And so we go to this training, and we didn't even have the money to go to the training. I think the training was like $250.
Yeah.
And we didn't have the money to go. And Brian was
it was
like,
$249.
$249.
We knew that $250 would eliminate a lot
there
of
you go.
people.
Yeah. $249.99, right?
Yeah.
And Brian was like, just come, just show up, and we'll take care of it. And I went to that training, and then he mentioned in the first video that we did, the putting a church wherever there was a Dairy Queen. We would say that, and people would be like, whatever, this guy's crazy. But Brian was like, that's awesome. And then he just started offering his time to us, and I didn't know what I was doing. And so if he was like, hey, you want to go grab a pizza? I'm like, where and when? Like somebody doesn't think we're crazy. Yeah. And so he was a super help for us early on as we started. Yeah. So I appreciate that big time.
You bet.
That's
you
sweet.
Bet. Well, I think the thing I loved about what you were doing is it's the bullseye of what we've talked about all day here. And the reality is it's hospitality.
Yeah.
Going to a Dairy Queen is meeting people where they are, right?
Yeah.
But also it was who you are.
It is.
I don't even know if there was a Starbucks in town, was
there? There wasn't at that point.
So you couldn't really
there's
do that.
One now.
But just to hang out with people and to be yourself, and that's what you've done these many years.
Yeah.
And you and your wife have just shown hospitality to a community and loved on them, and now you get to love on other pastors.
Yeah.
It's awesome to see. And so I think you've hit the bullseye. It's hospitality, and that's what Jesus did. And so thank you for spending an hour with us and unpacking that truth.
Honored to be here.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate it. I imagine others will feel the same, because I just feel I feel excited, just to think about how we can view hospitality in our own church family and whether that's Sunday in my own home. Like, it's an exciting thing.
Vietnam.
Maybe Belize.
Awesome.
We'll go with Belize for
Yeah,
now.
there you go. There you go.
But yeah, so thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome.